Hegel understands art as that transformative process by which a human community gives expression to its sense of itself along with its sense of how it fits into the ultimate nature of things. Hegel uses the name romantic art to refer to the art of what he understands to be the second great revolution, really, in human history, which is a revolution in art, also a revolution in religion, and also a revolution in human social organization or politics. You can think of two things that are really kind of experientially provocative. You can have an experience of a road and really be like, oh man, I want to go down that road. Or you can have an experience of a person you find really beautiful. Both of those can be really striking and really moving, but they're moving in kind of different ways. With the road, the thing that's exciting is that sense of going somewhere else. And it's that kind of, I don't know what it's going to be. And you think, oh, maybe I'll go there. With a beautiful person, it's this thing that's really gripping to you, and you think, oh, I want that. I mean, that everyday difference between the way we relate to those two kinds of things, those two different ways we can find something attractive, is a kind of everyday version of the difference between sublime symbolic art and classical beautiful art. Hegel understands symbolic art to be the art of the oldest cultures, and their natural elemental means like rocks and so on are used to express the mysterious force beyond nature, the ultimate source of reality that defines the context of all of us. Classical art sort of counters that with beautiful statues of human-figured gods, as if to say, no, the divine thing is happening right here in human culture. The anthropomorphic beauty of Greek art is really a challenge to the elemental symbolic art of the pre-Greek world. And as much as it's an artistic challenge, it's also a religious challenge with a different sense of what's ultimate. And it's a political challenge in that the Greek world is built around the idea that human beings should recognize themselves as having the authority to decide for themselves how to live, rather than being subject to the rules of some supposed god king. So in the Greek myths, the Greek gods are actually portrayed as overthrowing an older, kind of more primitive version of the gods. The Olympians overthrow the Chthonian gods. The anthropomorphic gods, in other words, overthrow these sort of elemental gods. And that's captured in this, vase painting of Zeus fighting with Typhon, where Zeus is, this beautiful human figure defeating exactly the kind of figure you would have seen in Egyptian or Indian art of a sort of half-person, half-animal figure. But analogously to that way that the Greeks can portray their art, religion, and culture as overthrowing this earlier regime of art, religion, and culture, in Christian art, the painting of the crucifixion is a similar kind of in-your-face to Greek art, where instead of this beautiful statue of a beautiful person, you have a painting of something really pretty ugly, a finite, horribly unhappy, tortured little person being crucified. And so whereas the symbolic art was sort of beautiful portrayals of what's sublime, the Greek art was beautiful portrayals of what's beautiful, romantic art is beautiful portrayals of what's pretty ugly. The Greeks represent a fundamental revolution in humanity's understanding of itself because they portray the freedom of a self-governing community as essentially the ultimate thing. But what the Christian revolution in human history brought on the stage was the idea that that's not ultimate. Important as that is, there is a dimension of human freedom and a dimension of importance that exceeds that participation in a self-governing community. And that is the domain of what Hegel calls subjective inwardness. And that idea that you are a discrete individual with your own inner life, and within that inner life, you have the capacity to be good. What ultimately needs to be recognized in the world is the absolute worth of individuals in their capacity to find within themselves ultimate values to which they have to answer. That stance was basically already put on display by Socrates in ancient Athens, and he wasn't tolerated by the Athenian state. His values were recognized to be the belief in a different kind of God, a different kind of ultimate, and he was understood by the city to be challenging their basic beliefs. Well, that same sort of thing that Socrates was doing is what Paul talks about in his letters when he says he's been called to be an apostle of Christ. Right? That experience of calling is the experience of finding, not from somewhere out in the world, but from in your innermost subjectivity, something speaking to you with absolute force to which you have to answer. Something that Paul also refers to as conscience. And that ability to be called is something that characterizes every human individual. Insofar as you're a free being, you've got that. And so the ability to be the site for engagement with the absolute worth that you find by turning inward doesn't distinguish between men and women, doesn't distinguish between slaves and politically free people, doesn't distinguish between Jews and Gentiles, as Paul says. Everyone, regardless of any of those finite specificities of their worldly existence, is a site of absolute worth. But it doesn't mean you, in your finite, nasty little dealings, are automatically such a great person. No, it means you are a site where that event of infinite importance can happen, where you can recognize that internal value that's calling to you. And to recognize that truth is precisely to say, oh, I'm not defined by being man, woman, Jew, Greek, slave, politically free, whatever it is. I'm not defined by my worldly specificities. What really defines me is this relationship I have to ultimate value, which is a thing you realize by turning away from the worldly definition of yourself to turning to that experience of calling. So it's only in that inner process of conversion that you become the place where absolute value is happening. So where's absolute value? Well, as the Greeks said, it's found in something that human beings can do, but it's not found just in political life. It's found in the individual, the finite individual, who precisely takes their finite situation and recognizes the specificities of that aren't the thing that's of ultimate value. What's of ultimate value is the fact that by virtue of being this finite individual, I'm in the position to recognize the thing of infinite worth. So it's in my turning away from the world as it's given to that inner voice that's speaking to me. That's where the absolute happens. So it's the finite being sacrificing itself from the point of view of its worldly finitude to be the inner experience of ultimate value. That's where the absolute happens. And that's the image of the crucifixion, right? The image of the crucifixion is not of a beautiful, idealized Greek body. It's of a little guy, a guy with an actual birth date and an actual bodily shape who dies to the terms of this world in order to be reborn in relationship to something else. And that's the thing he feels. That's a thing experienced in great inner suffering. And that's what you have to do to recognize absolute worth. So romantic art is that image of the self-sacrifice of the finite in the context of its turning to absolute worth. And just as it's a portrayal of the finite sacrificing itself, it also has to be that. Because the point isn't that this nice little work of art is the ultimate, or even that it can give you the ultimate. The point is rather that this has to be a kind of summons to you, a kind of exhortation to you to make that turn. You know, knowing that this other guy died, that's not such a big deal. Knowing that this work looks kind of nice or whatever you think, that's not such a big deal. What matters is that in experiencing that work, you have to feel called upon to recognize your responsibility in making that turn yourself, and that's what you've got to do. So the art itself is in a way sacrificing itself to something higher. It's saying, not me, that thing you got to do. That's where it's at. So romantic art as the art of subjective inwardness, the art that points to the absolute value that's found through turning to find the ultimate thing that calls to you from within your subjectivity. That art is like symbolic art in that it can't actually portray what it needs to make present. But in this case, it's not just the finite that can't present the infinite. The issue is rather that you're just getting a thing in the world, an object, an art object. But the thing it has to portray is your subjectivity. So you only really get the artwork when you get, oh, it's not that. It's not even art. It's art that's getting me to actually do something internally. So that's how it's sort of like and unlike symbolic art. But, similarly with classical art, it is like classical art in that it is about a thing that's happening in humanity. It's still anthropomorphic, you might say, but as Hegel says, it's anthropomorphic in a much deeper sense. The question is, where do you see what's essential about the human? And you don't see what's essential about the human in its outward bodily form. You see what's essential about the human when you see that we have this depth of inner subjectivity. So, like classical art, it says we're not going to some mysterious external source of nature. We're going to something that's happening specifically in the domain of humanity and human freedom. But it's not the human community, it is the subjective inwardness of free individuals. So Hegel's point is that there was another revolution in humanity coming to understand itself and its place in the world, and that revolution was articulated through these artistic works. That's how we came to say to ourselves this sense of ourselves. But that is the articulation of the world we live in. When we recognize the rights of individuals, when we talk about the importance of individuals being moral beings, even when we think about ourselves as rational beings who are capable of, doing science, the scientific revolution, Kantian morality, Locke and his political rights, those are all ways that as a human community, in a human political and social world, we say what is of ultimate value is that world that's created by individuals recognizing the higher things that speak to them from within their subjectivity. And notice that one further thing goes along with that too. Just as it is the assertion of the ultimacy of the freedom that's revealed to self-conscious individuals, this is also the vision of things that in a way sets free the world to be objective. This is a world where it is precisely the finitude and imperfection of things that is recognized as the context in which things of absolute value have to happen. And it recognizes that world as what confronts us with the responsibility to make it the site for the happening of things of absolute value. But it's not going to do it on its own. So, whereas classical art really relied on the medium of sculpture that portrayed this beautiful objective body in the world, and symbolic art really primarily relied on architecture in a way to say this natural elemental world is the house of God. Romantic art relies on painting first, because painting really reproduces that subjectivity of perspective. Instead of giving you a body in the world, painting gives you a view. And music presents something that doesn't even really have a sort of stable worldly existence. Music is realized in your hearing and in your feeling. So music is in a way what is most exemplary of romantic art, because it's an artwork that is carried out fully in the medium of subjective inwardness. And poetry, in a way, goes to the ultimate, because poetry doesn't even use an image. Through words, it works on your imagination. And it's that subjectively inward domain of imagination where all the artistic work happens. And finally, notice the last thing about this. Art itself, throughout this whole history, has been intimately interwoven with religion. But precisely what happens in romantic art is art on its own distinguishes itself from that absolute of religion and says, I'm art. I'm doing something different from that thing that has to happen in you. So romantic art is also the context within which art itself draws a distinction between itself and religion and philosophy. And precisely by, in that way, recognizing itself as a kind of autonomous domain, it also opens up the doors for art now to do pretty much whatever it wants.